Hi everyone.
Hello again. We've been in the book of Revelation a few times since we started the videos about a year and a half ago, usually tied to biographical stuff about opinions we had to change and what impact some of the interpretations that the Watchtower has had of parts of the book of Revelation had upon us. So we'll put some links into some of the videos we've already done that touch upon some of this. But it is good to revisit the book. It is the only book in the New Testament, indeed in the entire Bible, as far as I can recall, that has a blessing pronounced upon the reading of it, which of course in those days would have been a public reading. The Watchtower, of course, like all the cults, is fascinated with this book and has actually based many of its core teachings, the distinctive teachings of the Watchtower, are based upon this book. So we thought we'd do a brief history of their history with the book. To start off with, you are familiar with The Finished Mystery, 1917, book that sold at least 1 million copies in its era, but is now exceedingly hard to find for reasons that are no longer mysterious, probably having to do with confiscation and even destruction by the Watchtower itself. This book, as much as it built into the title, is the idea that we already know what God has to say. It's the finished mystery now. In 1917, well, it had to be replaced. So Russell's books were being, of course, discarded by the late 1920s, and that caused Rutherford to want to have to replace the light of the finished mystery. So significantly, he puts out a 2-volume set called Light in 1930. And interestingly enough, even though this book is now nearly, 90 years old? Many of the positions that are in these books are still being held by Jehovah's Witnesses. Not so much the technicalities as the approach to the book and the reading of everything is about us.
Yeah.
That's still with us.
And
So
that our organization fulfills the prophecies of Revelation.
yeah, and by the time I became a baptized Jehovah's Witness in 1971, these two books had replaced that light of Rutherford, but essentially held to the same positions as about the modern fulfillments. They are the Babylon the Great has fallen, God's kingdom rules, 1963, and then is finished the mystery of God.
We must have studied that a couple times because I do remember these two books. So in the 60s is when my parents became witnesses, when probably 62 or so.
So we thought we were really well fed with this 1,000 pages on Revelation. But what I didn't know at the time, of course, was that most of the positions were regurgitated from the Rutherford era. So even though that was now old light, when these books were out, it was approximately 40 years after Rutherford and 30 years after his death almost. And yet, the claim is still the same, is it not? They claim the mystery is finished. And of course this is coming out a few years before 1975, so yeah, it's a good time to put out a final commentary on the book of Revelation. And of course this one has built into its title, Babylon the Great has fallen, the unique teaching of the Watchtower that not only do they know what Babylon the Great is, but they know when it fell. Has fallen. So, of course, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you believe that the fall hasn't really been completed yet, i.e. it's world empire, false religion is still there, but you think that somehow in 1919 it fell officially and something was set up by that it causes you to have your present identity as God's only people on earth. And then, of course, just before we were disfellowshipped, at the same time we were being disfellowshipped, this book was published.
A new book.
Revelation, Its Grand Climax at Hand. And in that title is their claim again.
Yes, again they have at hand. So I thought that was noteworthy, that they always think it's at hand.
Which takes us back further than the finished mystery, because back in 1889, 99 years before they published this book, they have C.T. Russell's second book, The Time is at Hand.
Yeah.
Referring, of course, to 1914. And now the Grand Climax is at hand in 1988.
And the thing they have in common is it's always about us. And the fulfillments are connected with our history.
Yeah, we read this book. I read it fervidly in the wake of leaving the Watchtower to see what they now had to say, and I was not surprised to find out it was a recycling of what had come before, somewhat modernized, and of course with flashy color illustrations throughout. But it was more sensational, but really they had advanced in light in the, well, at that point, 50 years since, more than 50 years since Rutherford had printed his conclusions about the book. They hadn't advanced upon what light Rutherford brought in 1930.
They're still carrying the same distinctives.
So when we left, of course, the finished mystery had something to do with you and your departure, because at the point at which I was thoroughly out in my head and had resigned as an elder, you were still going to the Kingdom Hall and still fairly convinced that I was wrong and that they were right.
And I was reading all the older publications.
And we handed you the finished mystery.
Yeah, Russell's publications. And the finished mystery, I mean, I challenged my family, read that and you'll stop being a witness. And I still think that holds. If you read that book, I think the ridiculous stuff will just make you realize the foundation here is not good.
So we've done some videos on this already, so we'll put some links into those. But when we saw that the Watchtower was again hammering down upon Revelation's climax being near at hand, we thought we'd better do a revisit of the book of Revelation without glasses. By that time in 1988, we've told the story again in a set of videos on Genesis, that it was the book of Genesis that readjusted our doctrinal understanding, and especially our view of grace and what it took to be among the saved.
So I would just like to add here, yes, you need to reread the Bible without your Watchtower glasses. You know, I think when you're a witness, you think you know a lot about the Bible, but you're filtering it through a very different set of lenses, and it's going to make a world of difference if you read it without the benefit of the Watchtower, or I shouldn't call it a benefit, of the Watchtower glasses.
Without the help. The helps of the Watchtower, yeah. So before we get into the what we discovered in the book of Revelation, first time reading it without help of the Watchtower, we wanted to just do a visit to the doctrines you think you know, the truths you think you know that are actually derived from the book of Revelation. And we listed 7. There's a lot more than 7 things, but these 7 are core beliefs, or you could say distinctives that the Watchtower believes that virtually no one else on the planet believes, including Bible believers.
And I would say they're the ones that, as a witness, you have firmly in your head because they're scriptures you tended to use when you were out in field service. Proof text.
Proof text we tend to use all the time when we're evangelizing as Jehovah's Witnesses. So
things that made you feel good because you thought you were so unique in knowing this.
Yeah.
So one was, the first one we listed was the great crowd, the teaching of the great crowd.
The great crowd, and that's coupled, of course, with the 144,000.
Yeah, so, us being part of the great crowd and being ruled over by the 144,000.
And both those truths are in one chapter of Revelation. They're first mentioned in the book of Revelation in chapter 7.
Yeah.
So you use those all the time.
Right, and 14, right?
And 144,000 is mentioned again in chapter 14, and the great crowd is mentioned later in chapter 19. Then you have, of course, your
paradise scripture.
You're a part of the great crowd that's going to survive into the paradise earth, and you think paradise earth is mentioned in Revelation 21.
Yeah, I use that one a lot in field service.
And linked to that is the idea that between being a part of the great crowd now and being ruled over by the 144,000 in the paradise earth, something has to happen in between, and that, of course, is the destruction of all the kingdoms of the earth.
Right. So God's kingdom set up, and destroying all the earthly kingdoms.
And that's in chapter 11, destroying the kingdoms and destroying those who destroy the earth. That's back in chapter 11. And then you have, tied to that, of course, that's called Armageddon, and you get that word from the book of Revelation again, this time chapter 16. The only time it's mentioned.
It's part of your message, kind of attached to the good news as a warning as to why you should become a Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, so with that stick hanging over you and the carrot being the paradise earth beyond it,
it pushes you.
Then you're faced with the choice, which again is found in the book of Revelation, the two women that are mentioned in the book of Revelation.
One being one that you have to leave, Babylon the Great.
Chapter 17 and 18.
And one that you should join, God's organization.
And where do you find her in the book of Revelation? Well, you think everywhere, right?
Yeah.
That's why these books are so potent, because you don't realize the word organization is really not there.
But you're thinking of the passage of the woman who has the stars and gives birth to God's organization.
Well, the earthly organization, or the kingdom, born in 1914, this child that she bears, and that is caught away to its throne, and that's the kingdom born in 1914, and this woman is God's heavenly wife organization, and she has an earthly counterpart, which is the earthly organization.
And all these ideas are so firmly in your head, and you think they're so convincing, but most of it's you're reading it from a book.
And just in our little exercise here, we've seen that you're jumping all over the book of Revelation. You're not reading anything in its immediate context.
Right.
So what we want to do in subsequent videos is to break down these 7 distinctives of the Watchtower and show how, when read in context, they yield a completely different understanding much of the time. And even when there's something real about it, there's still problems attached.
The things that are added and the things that are taken away from the very passages we were using.
Yeah, and then you realize, if you know anything about the end of the book of Revelation, that there is a curse at the end of the book of Revelation to those who add and take away from the things written therein.
That should scare us all.
So in future videos, we want to go closer to all of these 7 things we had to unlearn, and more too, from the book of Revelation, but also bring us back to the beginning of the book and see the things that we immediately tripped over when we got into the book of Revelation itself without the help of the Watchtower. Next time.